Hi everyone, in this part of video I will provide an introduction to validation and why it is important on a BIM project. We will look at collaboration, coordination and validation process, identifying the what, when and why and who of it. First of all, we will look what is validation. Validation is the process of checking what is being delivered against what is required, and more importantly what has been agreed. The aim to check whether the client is getting what they have asked for in terms of usual assets with correct BIM. Validation can identify whether the BIM complies with the employee's information requirement and wider project standards. It can also confirm whether the BIM has been authored optimally, which could include checking if it has been cleansed of undesirable data, if it contains structured data, and that all components can be easily identified and extracted. And this validation process can either be an automated software based process or a manually process, usually in form of visual checks. So this is a little introduction that what is validation. So why the validation is so important? In any kind of BIM project, all people involved are professionals. But still, why? What's the need to waste our hours of value time and do this validation? Okay, I'll tell you that. Validation is important as it proactively identifies error within a model, whether modeling, design, data, or software. The process of validating models can act as an early warning, which is very important to identify insufficient project progress and monitor the overall performance of a design team. This can also highlight potential problems with the design team capability in producing agreed outputs. Ultimately, validating data and design model is primarily about helping the client get a complete and usable assets at the end of the project. This means getting a building built as efficiently as possible. For validation to be carried out efficiently, project standards must be implemented. Project standards set benchmark for the project, which include the need of the client when the it's always includes the need of the client when the client need their required assets in what format they need it, as these project benchmarks set key goals from which validation can be checked against. There is some guidelines available for preparing model, for which we can use that guidelines for preparing the checklists. We can download that validation checklist example from AEC UK website, which is absolutely free. So from that we can make our own customized checklist and we can use that checklist in our validation process. So what are the different kind of validation checks? Generally, validation checks are split into three different parts: geometry check, data check and coordination check. For a project to be fully valid and therefore seen to be complete and accurate, each of these need to be carried out very carefully. I will further explain in detail exactly what each of these are. First, let us look into the geometry. After the LOD requirement has been agreed, there can be checked as part of the validation process. Primarily, these checks identify whether the model and components within the project align and the predefined level of development or definition. Currently, this is usually carried out visually by spot checking components with each consultant design model and comparing with what was agreed before. Geometry checks are usually carried out to check whether the geometry model and issued are the model elements are aligned to LOD requirements set out within the employee's information requirement or not. Its main purpose is to identify whether any object have been over or under modeled. This will help and keep the model as streamlined as possible. If there are large amount of objects which don't align to employees information requirements as per in stated LOD, this highlights that design team does not fully understand the requirements and can inform additional training and awareness. Geometry checks usually takes place on weekly cycle. However, this will vary depending on the project specific requirements and it can vary as per agreed in our project. Typically, all design consultants should carry out geometry checks as part of their internal workflow to make sure the information they are producing is accurate and correct. The formal geometry checks are usually carried out by the information manager. This should be documented within EIR and BEP, which is BIM execution plan. Data checks will be followed by the geometry checks. So, data checks. The data checks are identify whether the submitted model and components align with the predefined data structure. They identify whether the data is accurate and complete, and whether the model and components included data which is required by project as a current work stage. Data checks are very important. A consultant design model may visually look correct and present design intent. However, without the associated data, it will be useless to other project stakeholders. The model needs to be periodically data checked to make sure that the project consultants are following EIR, employee information requirement, which is very important and mandatory to follow in terms of data inputs, and everything within the design model has sufficient data for required and agreed BIM uses. Data checks usually takes place on a weekly cycle. However, this can vary depending on project specific requirements, which may include size and weight. The key is to agree and document all the data checks. Typically, all design consultants should carry out data checks as part of their internal workflows to make sure the information they are producing is accurate and correct. The formal data checks are usually carried out by the information manager. These should be documented within the EIR and BEP, Build Execution Plan. And last but not the least are the coordination checks. Coordination checks are probably the most common and well-known checks carried out on BIM projects. In its simplest forms, coordination checks inform design consultants on any area within the BIM which needs further coordination. This is done by running a clash detection process. A clash detection process compares objects from each of the design model and identifies any which are intersecting. For example, a door in the architecture model clashing with a wall in the structure model. This clash result does not identify which of the design consultant is correct, but it tells us that there is a problem. The design team must work together to find a solution. Care must be taken when carrying out coordination checks, as running a clash detection on every element of every design model would produce significant number of clashes. These must be tailored to the project. These coordination checks can be rule-based to help automate the process. Clashes identified within the design models can generally be classified into two main ways. First, hard clashes, which refer to physical intersection of model objects, and the other is soft clashes, which refer to rule-based spatial intersections. Coordination checks are carried out to highlight area which needs further coordination. They help to minimize design errors and act as an early warning mechanism to identify potential problems. Due to design problems being identified and resolved in virtual environment prior to construction, this reduces the overall cost. And more importantly, the finally and coordination checks saves a lot of time. Typically, all design consultants should carry out coordination checks as part of their internal workflow to make sure the design they are producing is accurate and correct. Coordination checks usually take place on a fortnight cycle. However, this may vary depending on project specific requirement. The key is to agree and document a format throughout the process. The formal coordination checks are usually carried out by information manager on BIM or by a BIM coordinator, whatever it has been agreed as per EIR, Employee Information Requirement, and BEP, BIM execution plan. So, to conclude this tutorial, it's important to note, to serve this BIM validation process, there must be up-to-date and accurate data from all parties. This is where a data exchange protocol comes into play, which is very important. It should be detailed within the employee's information requirement, in short EIR, and agreed by the project teams. An agreement should be made to identify which consultants are required to exchange data in what format at what frequency. A trial exchange of this data should be carried if necessary in order to identify any problem with the workflows and outputs, as the data exchange plays a very major role for validating our BIM models. And this is in short about the validation of our models and how we have to validate a BIM model after completion of modeling. In further videos I will explain in detail about this validation process and BIM meetings and BIM workshops. Thank you for watching this video.